trapped here for a long time, shouting fervently for the butler to release him. He had thought he could restrain his elder brother, but to his surprise, his brother acted prematurely. Ron needed to stop his brother quickly, otherwise, he would ruin their family. Ron asked the butler to release him, appealing to the memory of his father. Regretfully, the butler shook his head. Looking at Ron, he stated that if his father were still alive, he would have already expelled him from the family. Had Ron forgotten that it was the fourth prince, Roland Wimbledon, who killed his father? The butler said his elder brother was currently rectifying this mistake, and Ron did not deserve the title of a knight. Ron angrily responded that his brother was blinded by greed. The butler shook his head while leaving, stating that even as a younger brother, Ron should maintain the basic respect. After all, his elder brother is now the count and the head of the Meade family. Having said that, the butler no longer paid any attention to Ron and quickly left the basement. Ron punched the floor brutally. Since Duke Ryan's defeat, he had become a captive. His elder brother refused to pay the ransom, and it was only the intervention of his good friend Petrov that allowed him to escape the prison. The relationship between the two brothers had reached a freezing point. Even so, Ron had no intention of disputing the position of the head of the family with his brother. Upon hearing the prince's plans to build a city in the Western Territory, he even considered going to the border town and pledging loyalty to the fourth prince, and maybe serving by his side as a knight. However, during a private party held at Meade's castle, he overheard news that the four major families were preparing to unite against Changji's stronghold. That very night, Ron stormed into his brother's study to confront him about the matter but was thrown out by his own brother. Ron had wanted to send a message to Petrov but was discovered by his brother and then imprisoned here. Ron recalled the weapons and the army of the fourth prince. No knight would have the courage to stand up against the fourth prince and his army. His elder brother hadn't realized what he was about to face. Just as he closed his eyes, footsteps sounded again in the basement. It was only when the visitor came to the side of the cage that he realized it was Aurelia, the third child of the Meade family. Aurelia had slipped in while the attendant was not paying attention. She had prepared some food in the kitchen for Ron. Seeing how much her brother had suffered, she felt super upset. During their conversation, Ron noticed that their elder brother was no longer in the castle. Ron's heart sank immediately. He asked where he had gone, but Aurelia said she wasn't sure. When Ron heard that his elder brother had left 2 days ago and had taken most of the guards and knights with him, his heart sank instantly. By now, including today, it was already the third day. It was too late. Even if he could get out now, he feared it was already too late. Aurelia, with a worried expression, asked Ron if it was true that their elder brother intended to harm Petrov and his family. Would Petrov be all right? Aurelia had always liked Petrov, and Ron had also tried to bring them together, but regrettably, it seemed that his friend had affections elsewhere. But thinking about these now was useless. Just then, through the thick ceiling, Ron heard a faint booming sound, followed by a slight tremor of the ground, as if something had violently crashed into the castle. Then there was another explosion, but this time it was much clearer, followed by short, continuous rumbling sounds, and the panicked shouts of servants came from above. Aurelia stood up wanting to go have a look, but Ron grabbed her hand, telling her not to go anywhere. After a while, a group of people stormed into the basement, wearing brown uniforms and holding strange long-stick weapons. Aurelia stood up and rebuked them, asking who they were and why they were intruding into the count's residence. A tall, robust man stepped out from the group, asking who was the second son of the Meade family, Sir Ron Meade. Aurelia was a bit scared but still stood in front of her brother to protect him. Axe did not harm the siblings but introduced himself after saying that he was sent by Prince Roland, especially to convey to Ron that Mr. Petrov wanted to see him. Roland was in the castle, observing the firearms used by the rebels. Petrov mentioned that he hadn't expected Timothy to also produce such weapons. What Roland thought was that these couldn't yet be called firearms, they lacked triggers and firing mechanisms, structurally resembling the earliest prototypes of firearms. But whatever Timothy had made, by the time Roland's army launched their spring offensive, Roland's army would be equipped with revolving rifles, bolt-action rifles, and machine guns. Soon, Axe brought the Meade siblings to the office. Entering the room, the siblings saw Petrov, who was standing respectfully to one side. At the desk sat a young man. Ron immediately knelt on one knee, and Aurelia also curtsied. Roland told them to rise and look seriously at them. Roland informed them that before he ordered an attack on the Meade family's territory, Petrov had repeatedly assured Roland that Ron would absolutely not participate in the rebellion planned by Jack Meade. It seemed he was not wrong. Roland emphasized that Jack Meade, alongside the other three major families, had attacked Changgu stronghold 3 days ago. This assault resulted in numerous innocent casualties. 2 entire blocks of residential properties were burnt down, and, to force the family to surrender, they even laid hands on Petrov's family. When Ron heard the last sentence, he almost doubted his ears. He couldn't believe that his elder brother could commit such a disgraceful act. Cold sweat broke out on Ron's back, and just as he was about to explain, Roland gestured to interrupt him, stating that those involved in the attack would not escape the punishment of the law, but Roland would also not misdirect his anger at the innocent. He assured Ron to be at ease. There was no need to worry about the Meade family being wiped out. In fact, Roland had a question for Ron. With Jack Meade already deceased, would Ron be willing to inherit the title of Count and serve Roland like Petrov? There was almost no other answer to this question. Ron Meade knelt without hesitation and swore allegiance with the standard knight vow. Looking at this prince who had taken his father's life, there was no hatred in his heart. On the battlefield, anyone could have accidents, especially when the war was provoked by Duke Ryan and not the prince. After the war, this prince did not treat the nobles harshly but allowed them to ransom the captives in a noble way. Jack's actions were completely without honor. Moreover, for the sake of Aurelia and other innocents in the family, he must also accept. Without the protection of the Count title, they would probably never be able to live a stable life again. Looking at his friend who had lost much weight, he felt a mix of emotions, and after a long thought, he could only say to Petrov that he was very sorry. Petrov said it was not Ron's fault. For a moment, Ron saw something different in the eyes of this friend he had played with since childhood. It was the eyes of a leader. He felt some distance had been created between them. It was at this very moment that Ron realized that on Aurelia's birthday banquet a year ago, the two had already taken completely different paths. The rebel nobles were no match for the onslaught of the First Army. With the pace of clearing 1 territory a day, Axe successively captured the bases of the Meade, Wolf, and Rose families. However, when the troops advanced to the Maple territory, the momentum of the attack slowed down. They encountered unexpected troubles. Brian stared at the towering Count's mansion in front of him, surprised to find a moat there. In the last round of attack, 2 soldiers were lightly wounded, one hit by an arrow in the arm and the other in the back. But the injuries weren't serious. The soldiers were at a disadvantage shooting upwards from below. Even if the opponents only had crossbows and short bows, they didn't have the upper hand. The only passage was the arch bridge, but it was heavily guarded there. Brian said, if the artillery squad was here, it would be great to fire a few shots at the gate. Regrettably, the stronghold was too far away, and the snow was too deep, thus, the cannon couldn't be transported there. According to the intelligence they gathered, the Maple family contributed very little to this rebellion. Even the Count himself did not appear, meaning the enemy's strength was almost intact. If they all holed up in this fortress-like mansion, it was indeed hard to deal with without siege weapons. If the soldiers were ordered to charge against arrows, they could probably capture the place, but there would be substantial casualties. But Axe had to be responsible for the lives of these soldiers. After a long silence, he looked at Brian and said, "Please ask the witch for help." Axe didn't want to do this. He remembered the prince had once said that a competent army should be capable of completing tasks independently at any time. But now wasn't the time for stubbornness. To unify the western region within a week and minimize casualties, he wouldn't be obstinate about maintaining unnecessary pride. Because the prince also said, a good general is responsible for the lives of the soldiers. They sent messengers and asked for Maisie's aerial support. The next day, Maisie arrived at the camp. The soldiers on the wall saw a giant shadow flying towards them. They started shooting arrows, but they couldn't harm Maisie's skin. Maisie transformed into a giant beast, clutching a package of new explosives in her claws. She opened her claws, and with a howl, the package went straight down towards the rooftop. Soon after, a mushroom cloud rose from the top of the mansion, and in an instant, it almost felt as if the earth shook and the mountains moved. Axe couldn't help but recall the first time he witnessed Prince Roland trying out this weapon. But this time, the explosive power was far superior. After silently praying to the sand god, he shouted loudly, "All troops, attack!" Soldiers rushed towards the Count's mansion. This time, no one dared to stop them. When Axe returned to the Canggu stronghold with his troops, it was the evening of the 6th day. The entire western region was finally under Roland's control. Petrov knocked on the door twice, and Roland let him in. Petrov walked into the office and placed a stack of white papers on the desk. It was a list of nobles, categorized by those guilty and those innocent, and then arranged by family surname. There were 64 guilty nobles, and 137 who refused to participate in the rebellion or were completely unaware of it. The highest-ranking noble in this rebellion was the Count Maple. According to Axe's report, this noble hid in a barrel in the basement after his mansion was breached, and when he was found by the soldiers of the First Army, he was so scared that he wet his pants. In summary, the 6 major families of the western region have become a thing of the past. Ryan, Maple, Wolf, and Rose families have no chance of resurgence. Halsam the Mede, although remaining, are also no longer noble families in the traditional sense. All the power of the western region will belong to Roland alone. Petrov hesitated for a moment before saying that the lists of the guilty and the innocent were all provided by Axe. Petrov worries that there might be any mistakes. Roland shook his head, saying Axe was proficient in interrogation. Moreover, Roland also knows that with Nightingale around, mistakes are impossible. With Nightingale's assistance, he can truly ensure that no bad people escape and no good people are wrongly accused. Petrov then asked how Roland plans to deal with the guilty nobles. Roland lifted his head and looked at Petrov, asking if there were Petrov's friends on the list. Petrov immediately denied it, just worried that if Roland executed them all, it might be detrimental to his future rule. Roland finds this interesting, asking, wasn't it Petrov who wanted blood for blood a week ago? Why does he want to spare them now? Petrov tightly clenched his fists. He indeed wanted all these people to go to hell, but even if Petrov strangled each one of them to death, it wouldn't change anything. If the news of the mass execution of nobles spread, other cities might also rise against Roland's rule. Hearing this, Roland was somewhat surprised. Such thinking is indeed the thought process of a mature politician, putting aside personal feelings and more about weighing the benefits. It seems Petrov has become more mature through this entire situation. Roland stood up, walked to the window, and told Petrov that he would inform everyone of what had happened, then publicly sentence all rebels in the center square, including nobles, guards, attendants, and mercenaries. The main culprits, that is, the direct initiators of the rebellion, and the villains with the blood of the people on their hands would all be sentenced to hanging, while the accomplices would be stripped of their titles and sent to the northern slope mines. This way, only those who have blood on their hands will be sentenced to death. And the rest would essentially exchange their titles for their lives. Once this news goes out, people shouldn't think the sentences are too harsh. After all, betraying the royal family is a serious crime in itself. Petrov nodded, then left the office. Their Highness the Prince is indeed merciful. Roland looked out the window, feeling a sense of fulfillment he had never felt before. This operation had completely cleared the obstacles to integrate the Western territory, and from now on, whether it was enacting laws or issuing policies, it would be unimpeded in the Western territory. Roland wiped the condensed moisture off the window and looked through the blurred glass at the city enveloped in pristine snow. Changes will start from here. 3 days later, Roland delivered a speech at the theater of Canggu Stronghold. The crowd gathered in the theater was smaller than he had imagined. Roland first mourned the casualties caused by the rebellion and said he would be distributing compensation. Most of the people of Changgu's stronghold were skeptical about the compensation. Because previous officials were often corrupt, even the relief grain in winter could be mixed with sand and spoiled grain. But the prince's words still caused a stir among the people. Apparently, no one had ever heard of a royal prince apologizing to the public, but there was still not much response from the crowd. Roland had to let Echo use her ability to voice and ask some questions, but unfortunately, the crowd still wasn't very responsive. However, Roland had already thought of a way to deal with this. Axe brought a large box of gold and poured all the gleaming coins on the table. The reaction of the people finally became enthusiastic. By the afternoon, many more people came to the theater, the seats were all filled, and many people even squatted directly in the aisles. The verdict had already been decided. The criminals were brought onto the stage, kneeling in a line before the people, with armed soldiers standing behind them. Axe declared the crimes, Petrov read the verdict, and some of the victims' families, seeing their enemies, clenched their fists tightly, some even burst into tears. In the end, a total of 132 people were sentenced to death, including 6 nobles, with the rest being mercenaries, guards, and servants who had committed murder during the rebellion. The remaining over 900 people, although they participated in the rebellion, did not have blood on their hands, so they were simply imprisoned, waiting to be sent to the northern slope mines. The next day, Roland summoned all the innocent nobles to the castle hall. Clearing obstacles was just a start, but to truly rule this place, he had much more to do. The most important thing was to establish a new order. To soothe the uneasy minds of the nobles, Roland specifically arranged a lavish dinner. To his surprise, these small nobles here did not seem to oppose Roland, and in their conversation, it seemed like they all had intentions to pledge allegiance. After some nice wine and dinner, Roland spoke and distributed small notebooks he had prepared in advance to the nobles. As expected, a noble quickly expressed surprise, asking how the paintings in it could be so lifelike and realistic. Roland mentioned that these paintings were made by a painter who was a witch, and she used magic to draw these pictures. This statement made everyone uneasy, unsure whether to keep holding the notebooks or put them down. Roland told them that the church's influence in the Western Territory had completely disappeared, and they didn't need to fear. Moreover, witches were no different than they are, a point he had verified many times.
What did he say?
Hearing this, Petrov almost choked but quickly agreed, affirming that the prince was correct. The other nobles awkwardly laughed along, saying they naturally believed it since it was confirmed by the fourth prince. Roland realized he might have said something ambiguous. Acting nonchalant, he changed the subject to the Pine family, describing how he met Nanawa and Viscount Pine in the border town. Some nobles also knew the Pine family, some were even neighbors with the Pine family before. Roland briefly explained how he met the Pine family, and how they are now living in the border town, protecting the town under the new system. After the month of the demons, Viscount Pine would also take her daughter out for hunting and enjoy life. They sold their territories in the Changji stronghold and settled in the border town, where his noble rank increased a level and their family wealth multiplied several times. Roland knew that fear comes from the unknown, and the resistance to changes in the system is the same, as the nobles here are uncertain how the changes will affect them. Roland had Soraya depict the town life of Tigu Pine in the form of a comic, hoping to give them a more vivid picture of the life in border town. Some of the nobles knew about Roland's plan to build a city in the western region. A young noble asked, "What about their territories then?" Roland replied they would still belong to them. Roland taking back the power does not mean they would lose everything, and under the new system, they will no longer need to fight, and the task of resisting external enemies would be completed by the professional army, and they only needed to operate according to the law, earning far more benefits than before. After all, compared to dividing a small cake, it's better to make the cake bigger. Seeing everyone silent, Roland said maybe they didn't know how much benefit it could bring them since they hadn't been to the border town. In fact, the town's income in the second half of the year reached as much as 30,000 gold. If not for the early arrival of the month of the demons, this number could likely have increased by another 10,000 more. The nobles all gasped in surprise. 30,000? It was clear to the nobles that their stronghold's annual income wasn't even close to this amount. Roland hoped they would become the managers of various industries in the stronghold in the future. As long as they obeyed the laws, they could naturally receive generous earnings and returns. Hearing this, a noble asked if this meant giving them the management of the stronghold. Roland gave a faint smile, saying, well, yes and no. The stronghold would become a part of the city under the jurisdiction of the central city hall. There would also be a subordinate city hall in Changji stronghold. And everyone here would be responsible for various affairs in the stronghold and city hall. There's a lot to talk about, but end of the day managing a region is a very complex task, and Roland will provide them with courses in management at a later date. Roland sipped his tea slowly, giving everyone time to absorb this information. Maintaining the daily operations of a region requires a significant number of people, and with the literacy rate still very low, Roland needs the nobles. What Roland is implementing right now is similar to mayors and governors in the 21st century. After a few minutes, Roland began to address the next issue. He turned to Ron and asked how much he knew about rats. Ron seems to be somewhat embarrassed to admit that he used to be the leader of the fiery gang, having fought over territories with several other rat gangs. Some nobles on the spot couldn't help but burst into laughter. Roland was also stunned for a moment, wondering how the second son of a major family would end up leading a gang of rats. Petrov explained that a few years ago, the underground gangs in the dock area were very rampant, with civilians and foreign merchants being harmed and threatened almost every day, and the stronghold patrol team turned a blind eye to this. Ron, unable to stand it, led his guards to recruit a group of people in the refugee area and drove the rats out of the dock area. Petrov smiled, saying during that time, Ron even wrote daily battle situations into letters and sent them to Petrov, who was far away in the royal capital. In the letter, Ron claimed that this was a great battle, no less than the struggle against demonic beasts. Hearing this, Ron's face turned red, and he pled Petrov to stop talking. Roland plans to eradicate these rats to allow civilians to live a stable life. However, Ron hesitated for a moment before saying that although these rats were not a match for knights, if Roland dealt with them as he did with the rebels, probably very few civilians would be left in the stronghold. Ron respectfully explained that the transformation between rats and commoners is ever occurring, as many commoners, in their struggle for survival, end up performing illegal activities. This is the reason why most lords and nobles tolerate the existence of the black market and rat gangs. Allowing internal struggles among them is more manageable than dealing with an uprising of the starving commoners. Roland's expression turned grave, realizing the unexpected circumstances of the origin of rats. When questioned about the organizers behind these people, Ron replied that some were locally supported by the nobles, and some were exiled criminals from other places. The prince, with a cold expression, scanned the long table, inquiring if anyone present was nurturing such rats. The nobles collectively lowered their heads. Roland declared that he would absolve them of their past actions if they cooperated with him. He assigned Ron a task to intensify the crackdown on all criminal activities within the stronghold in the coming month. Ron would need to cooperate with the First Army to remove the leaders of various gangs in the stronghold, thoroughly dismantling all rat organizations. As for the specific methods to accomplish this, Roland would have someone inform him. Petrov's task was to open the granaries and continuously distribute food until the end of the month of the demons. At this point, some nobles objected, thinking that doing so would only make the people more dependent and worsen the situation. Eventually, everyone would become beggars. Roland looked at these nobles. It seemed they always presumed the worst in common people, deeming them lazy and ignorant. However, Roland was well aware of the strength of the common people. In fact, with the right guidance and proper role models, common people are the real backbone of this world. Roland forcefully knocked on the table, stating that he had already decided, and there was no need for further discussion. He looked at the nobles present. It was time to teach them the first lesson. To properly become a qualified city hall member, it is crucial to communicate policies to the people, address their concerns, and listen to their feedback. Roland knew that reforming the nobles, unifying laws, integrating policies, and cracking down on crimes were all preparations made by Roland to establish a new order. Echo is walking on the street, with Axe following behind her. Echo tells Axe that he doesn't need to follow her. Axe, maintaining a distance of 2 steps behind her, insists, noting that this place isn't border town and isn't very safe. Furthermore, His Highness has ordered that if Echo leaves the castle without any other witches around, he should protect her safety. Echo also told Axe that there's no need for such formality towards her, but in Axe's heart, Echo will always be the chief of the Iron Sand tribe. Hearing this, Echo falls silent. Axe wants to comfort her but doesn't know what to say, so he just closes his mouth and silently follows her at a slow pace. Because of their tall stature and distinctive skin and hair color, pedestrians often stare at them. Echo apparently doesn't like being scrutinized like this and decides to head to a less crowded place. Echo remarks on how Iron Sand City never had such sceneries, and before she left the Southern Territory, she always thought the world was just sand. Back home, water was a life-essential resource that had to be fought over, but here, they don't need to fight over it. Axe remarks that they would fight over other things though: wealth and status. Conflict is inevitable everywhere. Echo lifts her head, looking towards the gray sky, and while walking on the bridge, Echo says that Nightingale has told her that she believes His Highness can stop these conflicts. Whether it's the Sand People or the other races and kingdoms, whether it's common people or witches, everyone can have an equal and free life. Suddenly, Echo asks if Axe would like to return to Iron Sand City. Axe snapped back to reality and without hesitation, replied, no. Axe had sworn an oath to the Sand Gods to always serve Prince Roland and to expand his territories for him. Axe knew that Prince Roland had promised to avenge them. Once Echo returns to Iron Sand City, no one would dare disrespect her again. Echo continued her stroll by the river. She didn't want to be the chief again. She loved places where trees were evergreen. She enjoyed being with Wendy, Nightingale, and the rest of her sisters. She cherished the songs Prince Roland taught her. Perhaps one day she might visit the Iron Sand City, but she didn't wish to live there and endlessly fight for water. It seemed Axe had more to say, but in the end, he merely added, no one can force Echo. Reaching an open space, Echo stopped. She planned to practice here, so she wouldn't disturb anyone. Axe nodded and stepped back, ensuring he was there to protect Echo. She looked at him, asking if Axe would like to hear a song she composed for their homeland. Axe was taken aback. Echo explained how she utilized the music composition techniques taught by Roland, blending the sounds of various instruments. However, she found the names Lord Roland gave to some genres, like electronic and heavy metal, were quite quirky. In Axe's mind, Roland was the cherished child of the gods. So what Roland says will always be right. Echo concurred strongly, noting that no one had ever treated witches with such genuine kindness as he did. Before Axe could respond, the singing had already begun. When the varied tunes flowed into his ears, he was immediately stupefied on the spot. What an unimaginable melody! It was like sand brushing over an oasis. At that moment, Axe felt he was back in the sunlit desert. Was this an illusion? He lowered his head, only to realize the snowy landscape had disappeared, and unbeknownst to him, he found himself in a desert, the burning sands filling his entire field of view. The woman in front of him had her eyes slightly closed, her singing voice echoing in the clear sky. She was standing in shallow water, ripples slowly spreading, breathtakingly beautiful. When the singing voice gradually faded, Axe found himself back in the snow-covered stronghold, everything like a mirage, as if nothing had happened. But in his palm, a few grains of sand were shining brightly. When Roland heard Axe's report, he wondered for a moment if his ears had deceived him. Axe solemnly placed the grain of sand on the desk. Nightingale looked at the sand, declaring it showed no traces of magical power. Turning her gaze to Echo, she mentioned that Echo's magic had consolidated, something Echo herself hadn't realized. Hearing that her abilities had evolved, she was extremely excited. Nightingale explained that Echo's magical power had solidified into a piece of blue transparent crystal, as clear as water, and the total amount of her magical power was equivalent to that of Maisie. Roland hoped Echo could sing again. Echo was somewhat embarrassed, but facing the gazes of the three, she reluctantly agreed. Echo took a deep breath, and soon, a symphony, completely out of this era, resonated, and the sweet singing voice unique to women enveloped the office. Initially, she was a bit reserved, probably having never performed indoors, but as the melody reached its climax, she became wholly immersed in the music. Roland seemed to hear the sound of warm winds brushing through green forests, and the room's temperature appeared to rise slightly. However, he did not see the boundless desert. He looked at Nightingale, who shook her head at him. Clearly, she hadn't seen those strange illusions either. Roland hoped she could sing a few more songs and invited everyone to come and listen. In no time, the office was full of witches, and all the songs received enthusiastic applause from them. After inquiring about everyone's experiences, Roland had it in his mind. That was, the extent to which one is affected by the song also depends on the listener's subjective experience. Those who have experiences resonating with the atmosphere of the song are more profoundly affected. Someone like Axe, who is from the Iron Sand City, naturally resonates strongly with music filled with the charm of the southern lands. However, Roland can't yet determine through testing how deep this influence can reach. Meanwhile, Ron stood in the center of Changji's stronghold reading the proclamation from Prince Roland. The stronghold city hall has started purchasing grains, which everyone can sell at any time. But selling grains privately will be prohibited starting next month. Upon hearing this, a commotion stirred within the crowd. They feared that the city hall would buy it at a low price and then sell it back to them at a high price. A blond boy squeezed out from the crowd, realizing that the food in the market would soon be swept away by nobles and merchants, which would lead to great chaos. He found his friends in a street corner, who had also heard the news. They were unclear as to why they were sent to gather this information. A man named Kanash controls them and forces them to come to collect intel. However, every mention of Kanash seemed to drain their spirits. One tall boy named Tiger Claw said they had no choice, as their food source was controlled by them. Since Snake Fang was also caught bringing out paper, and now that there were no witches, Kanash was targeting them. Snake Fang scorned, saying Kanash wanted to sell the paper to the church, while another girl K said that paper was not an item, she was their friend, they couldn't let the church take her. Next to them, a boy with a mushroom haircut, looking feverish and weak, wondered how paper was doing in the border town. Suddenly, everyone heard the next announcement from the speaker. In 5 days, the city hall would distribute relief food rations in the center square. Everyone could receive 2 servings of grain porridge, one at noon and one in the evening. This was declared by the prince himself. As soon as this statement was made, a stir occurred in the crowd. The group also heard this message. The weak Joe spoke up, saying that this way they might temporarily escape Kanash's threat and wouldn't have to starve to death in the cold snow. The tall boy quickly covered Joe's mouth. If such words reached Kanash's ears, all 4 of them would have to die. Following was the final declaration. His Highness the Prince would severely crack down on crime in Changgu Stronghold, including eliminating underground organizations, combating theft and robbery, and all illegal activities threatening the lives and property of the citizens. Ron advised everyone not to linger in the black market, nor to go to casinos, taverns, and other mixed places. The prince would also dispatch personnel to ensure everyone's safety. The 4 of them had no mood to listen any further. Hearing that they were going to be swept away, they began to fear. Returning to their camp, a man was sitting in a chair. This was Kanash, who had a fierce-looking scar across his eyes. He was muscular and tall with a woman behind him giving him a massage. He looked at Snake Fang and the other 2, scornfully saying that no matter how big and noble it is when they are on other people's turf, they have no sway. This is Changji's stronghold, not border town nor the royal capital. Without the approval of the Meade family, Roland can't do anything. Hearing that Roland wanted to be a protector of the western region made Kanash laugh. Just look at who is sitting in the royal capital. That so-called king is also nominally ruling over Grey Castle, but who cares about his orders? The woman by his side also agreed, saying it has nothing to do with them. But the second message Snake Fang brought is a bit strange. Before, when nobles distributed grain to earn a good reputation, they would inform them in advance, but why not this time? Kanash sat on the chair, planning to go and ask his leader later. Only he knows about things related to nobles. Kanash looked at the three of them and said their report was timely. But Kanash sneered, saying he knew they wanted to taste the grain porridge distributed by the city hall. He fiercely stabbed the dagger into the table, saying that on that day, everyone must stay in this building, no one is allowed to go. If anyone dares to, he guarantees they won't be able to eat anything for the rest of their lives. On the first porridge distribution day, Tiger Claw carried Joe on his back, running through the alleys with Snake Fang. Tiger Claw was somewhat scared, as Kanash had threatened them before, but Snake Fang said that Kanash hadn't been back for several days. Maybe the prince really was going to take action against them. Kay was looking out for them. The weather was very cold, and those people wouldn't notice them while huddling around the fire indoors. Moreover, Joe's condition was getting worse. A bowl of porridge might just help him hold on. Panting, they arrived at the square and saw that porridge really was being distributed. They hurriedly ran over but were stopped by the guards, who told them not to cut in line and to line up properly. Snake Fang knelt down in the snow, begging them to save his friend. His friend was sick and hadn't eaten for several days. Wade and his colleague exchanged glances. One of them reached out to lift the unconscious Joe, told them to go line up, and he would take care of Joe. Wade asked them if Joe knew the way back. If not, they could come back to find him. The two boys looked at each other. No one had expected this outcome. They thought either they would ignore them or they would let them bypass the fence to get the porridge first. Snake Fang decided to go back first. The queue was too long, and he feared accidents. They must return immediately. Reflecting on the truth of the porridge distribution, he began to wonder about the other two declarations. He faintly felt that a major change was about to come to the Black Street. The two sneaked lightly back into the house, only to see Kay, her face bruised, hanging at the doorway, with her feet on a wobbly stool, and Kanash's man stood beside her, sneering at the two. In an instant, Snake Fang's heart sank to the bottom. The guard said that Boss Kanash had already arranged for people to specifically watch them. It seems they street children needed discipline. It was time to give them a taste of consequence. Subsequently, one of the rats kicked the stool under Kay's feet. Her body immediately tightened. The rope dug into Kay's neck, her body trembled and her legs started to kick everywhere. Tiger Claw rushed up but was hit hard in the back of the head with a stick, and he fell stiffly to the ground. Snake Fang kneeled and pleaded with them to let Kay go, as Kay had not left the room. The man, wielding a dagger close to Kay, said she had been lying to him, and even after losing 2 teeth, she still wouldn't admit it. He violently stepped on Snake Fang's head. Snake Fang realized they were going to die here. He struggled to lift his head, seeing Kay's struggles were gradually weakening, and her body started to convulse. Suddenly the rope broke. Kay fell down without making a sound. The rats did not know what had happened when a line of blood sprayed from one side of the neck. Then the rats fell one by one. They all looked at each other, drawing their weapons. Before they could see the enemy, the wall broke, and a person flew in. It was their scout. Ashes walked in, her black ponytail casually tied behind her, instantly surrounded by the rats. The scene was only quiet for a few seconds. Seeing such a beautiful woman, they wanted to capture Ashes alive and then hand her to their boss. Ashes raised her great sword, and the nearby rats were knocked down with a single blow. Snake Fang suddenly heard a voice telling him to protect his people. At this time, Nightingale appeared behind him. Snake Fang clumsily crawled to Kay's side and gently placed his hand on her nose. There was a faint breath. It seemed that she was still alive. Tiger Claw also got up. Although he had a headache, it was no major issue. Suddenly, more men in uniforms rushed into the room, and the battle was soon over. Wade looked at Snake Fang, telling him it was all over, and they were safe. Snake Fang felt a twinge in his nose. The feeling of surviving a calamity made him unable to suppress his emotions. Everything declared was true. These people were sent by the prince to eradicate gang and rats organizations. They could all survive. Kay then slowly opening her eyes. Wade then brought out all the rats, their hands tied, one by one. All the surviving rats were ordered to stand in a line, including the three, Snake Fawn, Tiger Claw, and Kay, walking out of the building one by one. They saw Kanash kneeling on the side, his hands tied behind him. They couldn't believe Kanash was really captured. Each rat was asked the same question. When it came to Snake Fawn, Nightingale asked him if he had killed anyone or committed theft and robbery. Snake Fawn honestly replied that he had not. Nightingale nodded and told him to wait in the square for His Highness to distribute dinner. Snake Fawn took a few steps and then stopped, plucking up the courage to ask, "Are you a witch?" He thought he wouldn't get an answer, but Nightingale openly admitted that she was. Snake Fawn then plucked up his courage and said that these people were just underlings of Kanash, who hadn't been back here in 4 days and was certainly hiding with Bloodhand. Bloodhand was the real boss here, and they mustn't let him get away. Nightingale smiled confidently, saying no one would escape. The three were then released. They happily said it was really the witch who saved them, and His Highness's territory really accepted witches. Tiger Claw happily said then Paper must be doing very well. Kay, smiling, asked, "Does Tiger Claw want to see Paper?" But Paper's status is definitely very high now, going there would only embarrass her. The three shook their heads. End of the day, they were still just rats. Tiger Claw told them not to think too much about it and they should start eating. Ron stood on the high platform, answering the crowd's questions one by one, telling them that His Highness was determined to eradicate all rats from the stronghold and let everyone live safely without threats. After the month of the demons, His Highness will build a city. By then everyone can go help and work. The three quickly received their porridge, and they couldn't remember the last time they had such clean food. As Snake Fawn looked at the steaming porridge in his hand, he thought to himself that one day he would shed his rat identity, and by then, he would be seeing Paper without embarrassing her. Wendy and Scroll were savoring premium black tea. Blowing the heat away from the rim of her cup, they took a gentle sip. Once they dealt with her daily tasks, having another cup of tea was a pleasant respite for them both. Across the table, Paper was still grappling with the divine seal imprint. She had now mastered the technique of infusing the seal with magic and could control the output of magical power with relative precision, but no matter what she did, she could only light up the first magic stone on the seal. The two would watch Paper and remember the days at the Witch Association, sighing with sentiment. Back then, probably no one had imagined that they would ever lead the life they had now. But things were much better now. Their sisters would not have to endure the hardships they had experienced. Paper walked over, holding up the divine seal imprint, and complained to Wendy, "When will she be able to light up the second magic stone?" Wendy responded with a smile, suggesting that perhaps Paper needed to grow bigger a bit more. She then extended her arms to the young girl for a hug. Paper grasped her hand and found solace in Wendy's arms. As Wendy gently stroked Paper's head, Paper squeezed against her chest and mumbled unclearly, "How much bigger?" "Like Sister Wendy?" Spear closed her book, watching the three of them, feeling a sense of peace within her heart. Wendy inquired about Spear's thoughts on the City Hall, to which Spear shared her fascination with its organized, closely linked management structure. Compared to having several ministers manage separately, having the City Hall handle employee salaries made transition smoother and allowed competent civilians to join without hindrance. It was hard for her to imagine how Prince Roland could conceive such ideas. Just then, a guard entered the hall, reporting that a resident outside the castle claimed his daughter had just awakened as a witch. The guard remembered that in Prince Roland's absence, matters like this were to be handled by the Witches' Union. The three were taken aback. A newly awakened witch? They hurried to the hall, where two women were already waiting, one visibly aged, slightly hunched, and another significantly younger, standing rigidly beside the older woman. They both bowed respectfully to Wendy. The guard reported that they claimed to be migrants from the south, having moved into the inner city residential area a month and a half ago. He had verified their IDs, which matched the provided information. Wendy looked at the young girl and, in the gentlest tone she could muster, asked for her name. The girl didn't respond, prompting the older woman to nudge her to reply. The girl timidly said her name was Summer. Scroll turned her gaze to the woman, inquiring if she was Summer's mother. The woman nodded rapidly, mentioning that the child's father was at work, so she brought her daughter first. Then she queried if it was true what the prince's announcement said about witches receiving a gold coin per month as salary. Scroll squinted at the woman while Wendy clarified that, indeed, if the girl decided to join the witches' union. Summer opened her mouth and was about to speak, but the woman interrupted, pushing her forward, asserting that Summer would join, and her daughter would certainly be willing to dedicate everything to the prince, and then inquired when they could receive the money. Wendy couldn't help but furrow her brows at the woman's words. It wasn't hard to discern from her tone that the woman seemingly viewed her daughter as merchandise and the witches' union as a place to entertain the prince. Suppressing her displeasure, she responded calmly, telling the woman His Highness is currently attending to official affairs at the Chengdu stronghold. It's uncertain when he will return. Furthermore, joining the witches' union requires some evaluation and testing. The woman can let the girl stay in the castle first until His Highness returns to decide. The woman, pleased, patted her daughter's head and told her to behave well. Summer called out to her mother, wanting to say something more, but her mother had already turned and was walking away. Wendy stepped forward to hold her hand, gently reassuring her not to worry. The witches' union wasn't as her family thought, and she didn't have to stay in the castle if she didn't want to. The girl asked weakly if it was true, to which Wendy earnestly nodded. She then led Summer inside to warm up. The girl obediently followed her into the castle, lowering her head. At this point, Agatha also arrived. With Nightingale and Sylvie absent, it fell to Agatha to discern the girl's abilities. Summer, gazing at the strangers, felt tense. She held the green magic stone Agatha gave her and answered some questions about her age and when she awakened. Interestingly, her awakening day and her coming-of-age day were the same, a situation Wendy had never encountered before. Summer closed her eyes and let the magical power within her circulate. As she spoke, the magic-filled stone radiated a soft green light, enveloping Summer in its glow. After observing for a while, Agatha confirmed that the girl wasn't lying. Indeed, her characteristics were consistent with those whose awakening and coming of age occurred on the same day. It appears that Summer possessed a summoning-type ability, but her magic level was extremely low. Wendy, slightly taken aback, asked if such occurrences had happened in Takira before, and why was Summer's magic level so low? The Federation had witnessed the awakening of thousands of witches, and such incidents were not rare. Witches who awakened just at the cusp of adulthood essentially lost the coming-of-age day and abilities that other witches have, leading to weaker magic. Agatha pondered for a moment, concluding that contemplating these factors was pointless. It was the ability itself that determined a witch's worth. Hearing this, Wendy was somewhat displeased, stating that every witch should be viewed as a sister, not measured by their capabilities, as they are not tools. However, Agatha stands by her view. Summer opened her eyes, looking puzzled, and asked what they were arguing about. Wendy managed a smile for her and gently encouraged her to display her ability. The little girl held her breath and slowly extended her hands. Soon, the four of them witnessed a transformation. By the side of the hall's tea table, the figures of Wendy, Scroll, and Spear appeared again. Wendy and Scroll seemed to be in conversation, but no sound could be heard. Paper, who had left the hall long ago, appeared beside Wendy and slowly crawled into her lap, showing a sweet smile. Instinctively, Wendy reached out towards her other self, but her hand passed through the figure as if there was nothing there. After the illusion disappeared, an unusual silence enveloped the hall. Summer was drained of her magic power, and Wendy held her from behind to prevent her from falling. Agatha slowly mentioned that the ability to create group illusions was quite rare. She knew during her time in the Federation that at least two people had similar abilities, one of whom was a high-ranking witch. Wendy had Summer sit down and then asked her how many times she could use such ability in a day, to which Summer softly replied 2 or 3 times. Summer didn't understand many terms that were being asked, and Scroll patiently explained them to her. Summer gently nodded. Wendy smiled at Summer, telling her they would teach her slowly in the future. Wendy then had her use her illusion ability once more with all her strength. This time, the scene displayed was from a day and a half ago. The lamps in the hall were lit, and the sisters of the witch union were enjoying dinner at the long table. Wendy and Scroll recorded these and planned to let His Highness make a judgment. However, Scroll, who is always cautious, suggests that Summer can't stay in the castle before Nightingale returns to detect lies. Scroll knew that the possibility was extremely slim, but don't forget, His Highness Roland was the person they could least afford to lose, and his safety was more important than anything to the Witches' Union. Wendy also understood where Scroll was coming from. The two left the castle with Summer. After leaving the castle, the girl suddenly became much livelier and began to hold Wendy's hand, asking more about witches and the Lord. Wendy satisfied her curiosity by answering each question one by one. Summer then shyly lowered her head and said she had heard that the Lord, or His Highness the Prince, was a very scary person who tormented the women around him every day. Upon hearing this, Wendy and Scroll were both shocked. No wonder Summer was so afraid of the prince. Wendy said those were just rumors and not true, and the prince was a very nice person. Not long after they arrived at the small area where Summer's family lived, and the one who opened the door was Summer's mother. Seeing Summer, her mother looked somewhat flustered, thinking her daughter must have done something wrong, so the castle did not want her. Scroll said they could sign the contract once His Highness the Prince returned. The woman still seemed somewhat disbelieving, insisting urgently that Summer was a bit dull but was very well behaved and willing to do anything for the prince. Wendy felt a surge of anger rises in her heart, but she was stopped by Scroll before she could say anything. It wasn't until Scroll pulled out a piece of gold coin and waved it in front of the woman, seriously telling her that her daughter was indeed a witch and could sign a contract once His Highness returned. This was the salary for the first month, and she instructed the woman that she was now taking care of Summer on behalf of His Highness. The woman quickly nodded and said she would take good care of Summer. Leaving the neighborhood, Wendy could no longer hold back the annoyance in her heart and questioned why Scroll had given the money to such a person. It should belong to Summer herself. Scroll's answer was straightforward, asking Wendy if she thinks that Summer could keep that gold coin safe. If not, sooner or later it would fall into the hands of her family. If she could, it might be worse, as they might then completely see her as an outsider. Conversely, by giving it directly to her mother, Summer wouldn't have any burden, and perhaps they might even treat her a bit better because of it. There are still many days to come. If one gold coin could be exchanged for a more comfortable living environment for Summer, it might not be a bad deal. Wendy thought about it, and realized that Scroll was right. She had thought too simplistically. Wendy was disheartened by the series of setbacks, thinking sadly that perhaps she wasn't the right person to lead the Witches' Union at all. His Highness had revealed to Wendy his plans to make the Witches' Union an independent organization, with Wendy in charge. However, Wendy didn't have the knowledge His Highness had, and she couldn't be as thoughtful as he was. When it came to dealing with risks and incidents, she wasn't as rational and decisive as Scroll. Wendy didn't see herself as a suitable leader. It was as if Scroll had seen through her thoughts, stating that no one cared about them more than Wendy did. Scroll looked at Wendy seriously and smiled, saying, after experiencing the witch associations led by Hakura, she realized that a leader who truly cares about the witches, regardless of their abilities, and is willing to put herself in the shoes of many sisters, is the most trustworthy leader. And that is something irreplaceable in Wendy. Outside the castle, Wendy and Scroll heard the distant voices of Lightning and Maisie and smiled, knowing that His Highness had returned. When they returned to the castle, the witches who had heard the news had already gathered in the hall. Roland barely stepped through the door, not yet having had the chance to enjoy the long-missed warmth when a warm body already threw itself into his arms. Smelling the familiar scent from the strands of hair, he smiled, patting her head, and told Anna he was back. Soon Maisie and Lightning also rushed over and jumped on Roland. Soon, everyone came to greet him, and the hall was filled with a joyful atmosphere. Although the Stronghold Castle was much larger than this place, only these warm smiles and this small place could make Roland feel comfortable. After the lavish dinner, Roland returned to his office. Just as he was about to organize the books brought from the Stronghold, Anna walked in. Roland was about to show Anna the new books he had found, but before he could finish speaking, he felt a pair of soft lips pressed against his. Looking into her rippling eyes, it seems these books can wait for a little while longer. The day after, Roland, humming a little tune, walked into the office to find Wendy already waiting in the room. She, with a warm smile, shared everything that had happened over the past few days. When Roland heard about the new witch, he was overjoyed, as summer was the first to awaken in his territory. He instructed Wendy to bring her in the afternoon to sign the contract. Wendy agreed, but her expression suggested she had more to say. Roland asked her what was wrong. After a moment of silence, Wendy asked, with a degree of hesitation, she wondered if Roland was upset. She was referring to the perceptions and rumors refugees from the south had of him and the Witch Union. She also confessed that she didn't feel capable of managing the Witch Union and that Scroll, being more mature, should be the one in charge. Roland smiled and responded, saying that Wendy must have spoken to Scroll about this, but Scroll still believed that Wendy was the most suitable choice, right? Wendy was shocked. Roland put down his teacup and looked at Wendy, explaining that managerial skills and techniques can be acquired through practice and learning, but one's character and personality are hard to change. Among the witches, aside from Maisie, Wendy is the one most loved by everyone. Besides, Scroll is primarily responsible for the work of the education department and will be busier in the future, lacking time to interact and communicate with the new witches. This is where Wendy has an advantage, so she should have more confidence in herself. Roland assured her that he was quite accurate in judging people. Before Wendy could respond, the prince continued, as for the misguided views and rumors the refugees have about the Witch Union, it seems Roland had been neglectful. He also didn't expect his reputation to have spread throughout the kingdom. He pondered for a moment. To change this perception quickly, besides increasing publicity and debunking these rumors, he thinks it's better to let the organization operate independently as soon as possible. Roland hoped that the Witch Union could establish a system to operate independently and address employment arrangements for witches, while he would guide the usage and development of their abilities. Roland had considered this issue before. Right now, the Witches' Union only has about a dozen witches, a number he could still manage. But if the union expanded to hundreds, or even resembled the holy city Takira, having thousands of witches, it would not be possible for him to arrange tasks individually anymore. Wendy could consult Spear about structural issues and could also start recruiting town folks for paperwork. Wendy took a deep breath. If Roland decided to entrust this task to her, she would try her best to do it. After Wendy left, Roland continued to tidy up the books that he hadn't finished organizing the day before. Seeing the pages scattered on the ground, he couldn't help but think of the hot and breathless kiss from yesterday. Perhaps in his memory, the first time he met Anna, she was still a frail and helpless girl. But now she had grown into a graceful and charming young lady. The changes that occurred in her in just a short year were immense. Maybe Roland should take the initiative to respond to her feelings, Roland thought, but as he reached out, his hand touched another finger. Coming to his senses, he realized that Nightingale had handed the book to him. From the moment Anna had entered the office to the warm embrace, it was only a few seconds, and Roland hadn't noticed whether Nightingale had followed him into the room after the banquet. Nightingale smiled as if seeing through Roland's thoughts, saying that she had left the room immediately last night. She had guessed that Anna, having not seen Roland for a long time, would seek him. Saying Anna never repressed her emotions. With Nightingale's help, the books were quickly categorized and placed into the cabinet, filling the once empty bookshelf. For a moment, the two were silent. Roland stuffed the last book into the cabinet and thanked Nightingale. As Nightingale is about to leave, she questions how much longer will Roland drag it out? Don't keep Anna waiting. There was a hint of sadness in Nightingale's eyes, which Roland didn't see. When he turned around, he found that Nightingale had disappeared, but her half-spoken words still echoed in his ears. Though her voice was very low, he was sure he heard right. Nightingale had said, "Don't make me wait too long either." Roland was no longer the engineer dog who dealt with mechanical drawings all day long, and this was not the world he once knew. He was gradually becoming a lord governing a region, and he might even become the ruler of the kingdom in the future. He told himself to just act according to his heart. There was no benefit in forcing each other for some rules that were unsubstantial. It would only hurt Anna and Nightingale. Thinking this, Roland felt much relieved. Soon, Wendy brought Summer over.